right, everybody. So I'm here to talk to all of you about podcasting, the thing literally everybody has, right? Everybody's got a podcast, everybody's hustling a podcast. So the way that I'll start the conversation is like this. I work mostly in New York City, so a lot of my references are going to be a little New York centric, so that might be a little bit off, but just follow me here. So imagine you're on the subway. You've all been on the subway or some sort of like public transportation where you gotta wait for a train or a bus, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And so you're standing there, and right out of the corner of your eye, you see two people who are engaged in conversation. And I mean, they're engaged in conversation. Like, they're looking at each other, maybe they're gesturing a little bit, but the facial expressions are really giving like, this is an intense conversation. It's none of your business, but we're waiting. Just kind of stroll over. Maybe you shift your weight to the other foot. Don't want to make it obvious, but you're listening. And the point is that people are attracted to intimate conversations. And really, at the end of the day, that's what a podcast is. It's just a recorded, intimate conversation. And so really, that's what you're going to be looking to do with whoever is going to be the host that you're working with if you're a guest, or if you're hosting a conversation, a podcast, that's what you're looking to create. So one of the things that I try to also make sure that people understand when they're going to be doing a podcast is that a lot of times, especially when you are in a professional situation, is that you've been taught to speak professionally. We all know what professional speak is. There's certain things you do say, certain things you don't say. You don't want to, say anything that might be remotely offensive, anything else like that. What works best for a podcast is if you're able to bring your authentic self to the microphone. Now that might sound a little bit odd because again, the first time somebody said that to me and I was just like, have you heard me actually talk? Like, that's dangerous. We should never put that on the microphone. Okay. Exactly. My first thought was like, I curse like a sailor. We should never do that. No, obviously I don't mean that aspect of it. But when I say your authentic self, what I'm talking about is the part of you that brings out an anecdote that is relatable to somebody else, especially if you're talking about something as dry or stale that could seem as, I'm thinking maybe a property tax thing or some new piece of, well, most of my work has been in government, so bear with me here, or a piece of legislation or something like that, something that really just doesn't excite the imagination. But if you can create something that gives people something that like, oh wait, but I get that more on a human level, well now suddenly that's an interesting conversation and I want to hear more about it. And so again, when people are, one of the questions that I actually got during lunch, I remember your question, which was what is the difference between a formal interview and a podcast interview? And so for that I would say, as Mark was explaining earlier, that when you're sitting for a formal interview, like say I'm the reporter and over there you're the guest. And so it's understood that this is going to be a back and forth volley. I'm here to get information from you. You are there to hopefully give me information. If you're a politician, you're there to avoid and evade. But we understand what the dance is. It's a back and forth, and a good journalist can make that back and forth feel kind of like a dance. So it kind of feels like a conversation, but it still can be somewhat mechanical. Again, a regular conversation, if you think about the way that even we've been talking with each other, like up on the rooftop or whatever, people just talk, sometimes they interject, sometimes they, ask a fault, wait, I don't understand, what does that mean, or something like that, etc. It's a lot less formal and a lot more intimate, and that's what I mean by an intimate conversation. And so that's something that really attracts people. So why the intimacy? Well, because most people, when they're listening to a podcast, there's two places that they're listening to it. And one is on everybody's favorite personal assistant. It's your phone. It's literally pumped into your earbuds, into your ears. And if a good conversation is being had, it can take you into whatever that space is, that intimate space that I was describing between those two people. You almost feel like you're there with them if it's a really, really good, intimate conversation. The other place that a lot of people tend to listen is in their car. But of course, there's been a dip in people in their cars because so many of us no longer have to commute the way we used to anymore. So that became a drop in listening. But again, this is always the place where most people are going to be listening. So you want people to, again, have that very intimate feel, that intimate experience with your conversation. Okay, so once you get you decide, I want to be an expert on a podcast, I want to go on to something, you want to pitch to different shows, etc. But which shows do you want to pitch to? Because you can't just blanket pitch. And I'll give this example because I will never get over this. When I was, and this is more of a reporter story, but still, when I was a reporter covering state politics in Albany, New York, I got a blanket pitch. We get them all the time. And this one, I swear, said, "Dear Jenna, this is an opportunity you don't want to miss. We've actually managed to get the original members of Queensryche back together, and they're going to be performing in Seattle or something." And I'm reading this email, and I'm just like, "Sir, no, none of this is going to work at all." And my point is that you want to take some time to kind of do some research into what kind of a podcast you might be reaching out to. For example, is this one host? Is it two hosts? How do they handle their conversations? Are they more formal and serious, or are they more relaxed and jokey? Because again, depending on what you're there to talk about, maybe you don't want to do Theo Von. But at the same time, you might want to do something, if you've got something very serious, you want to find something that's a little bit closer to maybe the New York Times, The Daily, something like that, which is a very formal news podcast, but at the same time, it's also a podcast that really just promotes the other New York Times reporters. So I wouldn't say go posting or to pitching The Daily. That's not going to happen. But there are podcasts like that. Then there's also the fact that you have, as I said, everybody's got a podcast. So you also have journalists like myself who have done podcasts, and that's everything from interview-style podcasts, like the one that I do right now, Laid Off and Looking. I've also done podcasts for my previous show, Metro Focus, which was more of a news magazine, so it gave me a lot more flexibility into what I would cover, who I would talk to. And then also there's investigative podcasts, which is, again, another place where you might get reached out to as an expert to help a reporter build out a story and help people better understand whatever the subject matter is that's being covered. So that could be anything from, like, for example, the insurance industry. Say somebody's doing a bigger story about how the changes that are coming to the insurance industry are actually going to be trickling down to the regular person. That's a place where you'd be an excellent guest, but that's probably going to be like what I'm just thinking of right now is an investigative podcast. And so that's something where somebody might talk to you for as much as half an hour, but they're only going to pull a few clips and then write in and out of those. So that is something else that it's really worth taking the time to go in and try to figure out what is the type of podcast that would be a good platform for what I'm doing and what it is that I'm going to be talking about. Do I fit in this space? So once you've figured out what kind of podcast you want to do, then there's also the question of, as I mentioned, how long is the podcast going to be? Some people do short interviews. They'll do 2 or 3 segments within the show, or they'll call them acts within the show. Is usually like there's an intro, like a cold open, and then they'll do like headlines of the day or something, and then they'll do something else, maybe an interview, a joke section. It depends on each show. So that's something that you also want to take into consideration when you're pitching. Some podcasts also, because of the just mammoth number of them that are out there right now, you might be pitching directly to the guests. You might be pitching to a podcast company. You might be pitching to, again, something that's more of a formal newsroom, like The Desk, as Mark mentioned earlier. And it, again, is going to depend on who that podcast is connected to. And I say this so broadly because there are literally millions of them out there right now. And even though podcasting is an audio format, it's now also video because everything lives on YouTube now. Nothing is just audio anymore. YouTube happens to be the platform that's getting the most traction when it comes to people watching and staying with something. So a lot of places now we're going to be like, yeah, we're going to record this for video and for audio. So when you go to do a podcast, you don't have to be camera ready in the same way, but you do have to pretty much understand that you're going to be recorded and be comfortable in that space. So that's something else to keep in mind when you're pitching yourself as a podcast. So one of the other things that I thought was really interesting when Mark was talking was about being a soundbite machine. And this is another space where like bringing your authentic voice comes into play. How on earth do you be a soundbite machine? That doesn't come naturally to most people. If you ask somebody about a subject, they might say, well, I don't know what to say. I mean, I know about this subject, but how to condense it. So here's what I used to tell interns when I would train them. Okay, I might have mentioned this story earlier. And that is that, again, you're on the subway. You've come down to the platform, and you see one of your friends, and oh my God, okay, I've got this thing that I want to tell them. And it could be whatever it is that you're an expert about, but like, I want to tell them that thing. So as you start to walk over to them, oh my God, damn it, here comes the train. I've got like 30 seconds to tell them. So whatever it is that your thing is, it's all in the delivery. And what you would naturally say to that person, like, oh my God, guess what? Nassau County's gotten rid of its property taxes. By the way, for anybody who's not an American, we do property taxes to fund everything. It's ridiculous. But let's say they got rid of their property taxes. Oh my God, really? Why would they get rid of their property taxes? Well, it turns out that they've taken their entire school district and they've privatized it. So they don't even need to fund their schools anymore. Again, we fund our schools through property taxes. It's ridiculous, but it's what we do. Okay, so you tell your friend, oh my God, so they've gotten rid of their property taxes and it's because they privatized the schools, but it turns out by doing that, they don't have enough money the county doesn't have enough money to fund the police departments anymore, but oh, you know what, the train's here, I gotta go. I'll tell you more later, okay, we're gonna talk. Now you've given that person a reason to wanna circle back and be like, the entire F, there's no police department in this whole county, what? This is one of the wealthiest counties in America. So that's the kind of thing that you wanna keep in mind when we talk about like being a soundbite machine. It's finding what it was you would say to someone very naturally and very honestly about a subject you feel really, really passionate about. Does that make sense? Okay, all right. So the other thing that I was really thinking about is making sure that you don't get too much in your corporate head. And so a good way that I was thinking to give an example of that is since we're in Washington, D.C., we've all heard a politician give an interview where they sounded like a robot. Like whatever it is that they've said, it's been so completely focus grouped within an inch of its life that it's almost as if, yes, their mouth is moving, but nothing of value is coming out. Okay, so we all know what that is. At the flip side, have we heard, just, and it's a rare occasion when it happens, a politician who's dropped their guard and said something that is incredibly personal, incredibly poignant, and that most likely stuck with you, right? That makes something that you would be like, oh wait, I do remember that time. And an example from me would be, I got a chance to speak with some of the Congress people. I want to say if January 6th happened, yeah, then it must have been like that following March. But it was still fresh in everybody's mind. And so when I was interviewing this one congressman who was local to the New York City area, this person was still processing the trauma that they had from that day. So what started out as, this very sort of like, well, this is America and that's not how we handle the transfer of power, and which were all the things that they were all saying. I feel like I had followed up with a question along the lines of, but for you personally, what was going through your mind? And that sort of opened up the floodgates to really begin to like share that intimate part of the story. And that's what stuck with a lot of people. That was one of the pieces that we had gotten a lot of comments on once we posted the piece online. So again, that's the kind of thing when people say your authentic voice, it's the voice that you communicate with to yourself, to your friends, in that true and real, honest way. That's what makes a really good podcast conversation. So first of all, does everybody kind of grasp that? Because I know that can feel kind of weird, because again, the first few times I heard that, I was just like, I still don't think you want me to use my real voice. Okay, all right. So then with taking all of that then, when you proceed to either go into a podcast as a guest, or has anybody here considered launching their own podcast, or has launched their own podcast? Okay. Are these considered, or are these have-dones? Have-dones. Okay, so have-done. Who is working with a production team and who is doing it solo? Production team? Okay. Production team?
I have like one guy help me.
A guy, okay, a guy that.
We do it all ourselves.
You do, okay, all right, and that's the other thing. And then do you have? A company, okay. And the reason why I asked that question is that a lot of people, everybody's like, oh, just launch a podcast, it'd be great. It's really, it's not impossible, but it is a lot, yes, it's a lot of work, it's a heavy lift. And so that's something that you want to take into consideration, like, okay, if I'm going to launch this, do I know how I'm going to get help? Who's going to help me? How we're going to make this actually work? Because you're talking about an audio engineer. Since I mentioned YouTube now, you're talking about a video editor. You're also talking about maybe somebody who's going to be helping you produce, because that's a whole big thing of making sure that you have the right guests, that you've done the right research on them, and that you're able to ask them the kind of questions to get them to open up and things of that nature. And again, not impossible. I do not want to discourage anybody, but it is a significant amount of work, and it can feel like a heavy lift, but not impossible. So for the people who have done podcasts, can I ask what was your takeaway from your experience of having been a guest on one or hosted one?
I've been guest, but I have my own as well.
Mm-hmm. And so what was your feeling in terms of being able to not just communicate with your guests, but also to feel as though you might be making a larger connection?
So the best podcast I've ever done is one where it was just me. I hadn't really, I'd planned for it as in I knew what I was going to talk about, but it was just so conversational and everyone was really engaged. I also did one where I was online and I couldn't even see the guy that was hosting. And honestly, like you remember, I came out and I was like, that was the worst podcast I've ever done. I felt so disconnected from him. I felt like he was just there to like, quick, let's get through this and then it's done. And it was just received badly by my audience. Like I didn't get any sort of messages back from it. So I'm definitely better in a conversational style podcast where I can see people. I'm such an energy person. So if I feel like people are engaged, it just makes me more into it. And then doing my own, I started with Scott just in our lounge, and then we've developed into being in an actual recording studio now, so it's much better, and we're on YouTube. And that advice about just being authentic, like that is, I'm just my stupid, silly self, and it's what resonates the best. So instead of just being proper and having everything planned out and figured out, and I've got to say this, I have to say this, we just go for it, and it's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's really good.
Exactly. I know you guys also, question?
I actually have a podcast.
Okay.
My producer, the one guy that I work with, he came up with the concept for me, and he wanted me to do a solo, which has always been a challenge because I've been great. It's been the one that I end up putting to last place, and like the one I dread doing, because every time I have to do it, I have to do basically, I'm basically going through my three things, like a hotel deal, an airline deal, and I'm only talking to myself, and I'm having a hard time just kind of speaking into the void. If I do regularly every week, having a new guest, and I have a team, and so it's not a problem when I'm doing the audience. When I'm just speaking into the void, that's the biggest problem I have, and then I'm either speaking too fast, I feel like, because I'm trying to get through it, and it's the one challenge I have.
So as a solo host, and this can be, again, work with me, because this can feel a little bit weird. If imagining someone that you're talking to, like your mom or something like that, doesn't quite work, what actually I learned to talk through the mic and to the audience was by talking to a teddy bear, I kid you not. When I first started working with public radio, I would go into the studio, it was me and my Winnie the Pooh bear, and Winnie the Pooh heard all about the news of the day in New York City. So that would be my suggestion, is to get something that you can talk to. Because again, you don't want to talk at the mic, because that'll sound a little bit weird. You want to talk almost through the mic to a person, and it'll feel to the audience like you're talking to them individually when they're listening in their earbuds.
Yeah, that's funny. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, okay.
You mentioned in the beginning about interjecting, and
Yeah.
that's the way we normally talk sometimes. So as a coach, I practice not interjecting with my clients one-on-one. And one of the podcasts that I did, I was very observant of that, not wanting to interrupt. But are you saying that in a podcast setting that etiquetely that's okay?
No, that's totally okay, and that's fine. And one of the things that also I think a good podcast host is going to do is be an advocate for their audience. Because a lot of times when people are experts in something, they'll use jargon, not even thinking about it, they'll use jargon or something like that. So that's where, wait, hold on, what does that mean again? And so not only is it fine for the host to interject, because again, that's normally, naturally how people speak, but for you as the guest to not let that interjection throw you off. Because I've also seen that happen to some people where they're just like, wait, I thought this was the part where I just answer. You asked me another question, I wasn't ready. How do I go back? So you want to not allow for that kind of natural interjection, which is really just asking for you to just give a little bit more information about whatever you're saying, so that we can go back and continue the conversation. But we had another.
Yeah, first let me say, you used my quote. My intro to my podcast, the audio intro, is the Maya Angelou quote that John used. Was it John? Was it yours? No, it was.
No, yeah, it was mine.
Yeah, no, John, I think John had it up, yeah.
It's my intro, and then I talk about, but it's called Quoted, Kwooted. And the whole point is that I feel like people, we live by quotes. Something someone said that's inspirational, or that they live by. So the podcast is all about our conversation sparked from my guest quotes, like that thing that makes them, whether it's inspirational for business, personal life, whatever. And it drives our conversation. Like, it's like I end up sitting, like I feel like I'm sitting with my friend of 30 years, because I'm interested in their quote, but I don't ever send questions ahead of time, but I do some research, but I let the quote drive the conversation. And I tell people that don't go looking for a quote that's not really your quote, because they want to be like, I want to be the most profound. I'm like, I don't want to hear that. Just what's the real thing? Like, even if you don't get the whole quote exactly right, then we'll be like, oh, I know the quote. We'll fix it up for each other, we'll fix it up for them.
Yeah.
The point is, it becomes authentic when you make sure that you really said that that's the tone. And here's the funny thing, though. I've recorded, haven't put it out. It's on every platform for podcasts. I have not, we have lots of,
Oh, yeah. Well, no, I think that's great, and that actually goes to what Mark was saying about getting to the end of an interview and saying, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to add? People will come up with the most amazing quotes all on their own. Again, if you try to force something, that's when it starts to sound artificial and mechanical and not real. If you allow yourself to, everybody's got a genius inside of them, especially for whatever it is that you are an expert in. You put in the time, you put in the work, you put in the dedication, you have that in you. It's just a matter of allowing yourself to set it free, if that makes sense.
Actually, on one of the podcasts I went on, they said to me, in an email before I got there, when you arrive, we are not going to speak about anything. Just say hello, then sit down and we'll get straight into it. And the reason they do that is because a lot of the time the good stuff is in the conversation that you don't. So you've already had the conversation, then you're trying to relive it and it's not coming out the same. So that was the best advice. Now, when I do my own podcast, my head coach that I do it with, we just come straight to the room, we sit down, and then we just start talking from that moment, and it makes it so much more organic and real, rather than having those great conversations beforehand and then being like, oh, say that thing again.
You guys sound like you're experts in this already. I'm like, why am I even here? The only other point that I would want to make, and this is something that a sin I fall guilty of as well, and that is try not to ask your guests compound questions. Everybody does that. You hear something, they make a point, you get all excited, like, oh my God, this and that. Two things happen when you ask compound questions. One, and again, having worked with politicians, you give your guests the opportunity to ignore one of your questions. I'm just gonna take one and go with that, and I forgot, or they could genuinely just forget. I've had conversations where somebody's like, wait, what was the other thing that you just asked me? And because I got so engaged in whatever it was you were saying, now I forgot the other thing that I asked. So even if it's a matter of going into the studio with like your own notepad, like if you wanna just go back and like, okay, but I just wanna follow up on this or follow up on something like that, by all means, do that. Just try to avoid compound questions so that you don't lose your, oh, we're done, my God.
That's why I'm standing here.
I was like, he got him kind of quick. I'm not done yet. Okay, we're done. Well, anyway, so it sounds like you guys really have a grasp on this anyway, but if there's any other like questions or anything that I can add to, please let me know. I'm an open book with my experience in journalism.
Thank you.
And yes,
She said she was ending with, and my last two things, and she told us one.
Okay. Well, so my absolute final thing when it comes to podcasting, which I was totally going to let it go.
The one we're gonna remember now.
Exactly. Now, nothing else that I said is going to matter at all. More than anything, I would say the super important point is that you also want to make sure that in addition to bringing your authentic self and asking thoughtful questions, etc., that you have had a chance to definitely feel like you've made some sort of a connection with a host. Podcasts just don't necessarily, this isn't like an interview, a traditional interview where, again, as Mark was saying, if I don't like you, it doesn't matter. I'm here to get information out of you. But for a podcast to really work, and you can hear them in the ones where like the guest and the host aren't really vibing, it ruins the entire experience. And now in some way you're listening more for the awkwardness of the conversation than you are for the information. This would be something where you just casually sort of by osmosis of the passion of this conversation be picking up on whatever it is that you're talking about, that you're promoting, that you're an expert in, that you're teaching about. That should come very naturally.